Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot, daf samach tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruchi Summer. This is in honor of the start of Shana Ba'aretz learning of my daughter and my niece, granddaughters of Meryl Sasnowitz. May they deepen their connection to Eretz Yisrael and their passion and the passion for learning of their families, including their savta. Batzlacha. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick point about the very end of yesterday's daf. So we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, there was this line that Rav Huna said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that parnasa is not like T'nai Ketubah, to which the Gemara, after going through a few other options, said, what do we mean by this? What we mean is that if someone's sitting on their deathbed and they say, don't give my daughters food from my estate, we don't listen to him. That's a guaranteed payment. But if you say, al yit parnasu, which we explain parnasa to mean, don't give the nedunya to my daughters, we listen to him. Okay, because a father, first of all, doesn't have to give a nedunya. There's no responsibility for a father to give this nedunya to the daughter when he's alive. He's supposed to do it in the event of death. He's responsible too. But the point is, if he wants to, he could say basically, or maybe we're learning from this, that a father theoretically doesn't have to give a dowry to his daughter. I just wanted to point out one important point, which is there's a bunch of Rishonim, okay, starting from Rabbi Yochanan, and the Rifu mentions this, who have an opposite girsa than this. And it says the exact opposite of what we just said, which is that mizonot, since a father, if you remember, doesn't have to sustain the girls during his lifetime, if he makes a specific stipulation that he doesn't want them to support the girls after he dies, then give them food, then they can listen to him. But if he says, I don't want to give her a dowry, they don't listen to him. So we have the exact opposite, which leaves us a little bit more confused, but like usual with the Gemara, it's important to know that there's different opinions about things, and therefore there's some lack of clarity. Now we're going to start from the top of our daf. Talale Rav l'Rebbe ben Echite. I don't know why they specifically tell you that he did it in this way, but he was sending a letter to Rebbe. Rav was sending to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi a letter, and in the letter, in between the lines, he wrote the following question. I don't know why they tell us in between the lines, but maybe it just really means like, in between saying, hi, how are you? My wife is doing well. He added a question. Okay. So he wanted to know the following. If the brothers, again, what happens? The father dies, and we're going to have a lot of this today about how she gets paid her dowry from the estate. Okay. There's going to be all sorts of questions about this and all sorts of ramifications to the answers that we say. So the question is, if, remember, they inherit all the property, but of this, they have to give a tenth to each of the sisters, again, depending on how many there are, and whether they give a full tenth from everything, but they give a tenth to the daughters. What if she abdu? What if they sold the property? The property is now in someone else's possession. Mau, can she demand it from this mishuabad, this land that's been sold to somebody else? Or some other way, mishuabad, we're going to see there's two ways it could be what we call mishuabad, which is either they sold it or they gave it as collateral for a loan. So it's not fully in their possession, right? Which one is obviously more likely that they'll be able to collect? The collateral, because the collateral, and this is going to be important, I'm not just stop saying this, but I'm saying it so that you know when we continue here, which is the collateral is more in their possession because it's only given as collateral for a loan, right? In case I don't pay back the loan, the brothers say, take my watch. So, or take this piece of land, but here we're really talking about land. It would say, take this piece of land, okay? So now, if basically she comes along to collect her money and they don't have any property, can she either take it from the collateral, which is more likely to say yes, or even from land that they already sold to somebody else? Well, in the meantime, we're going to have a lot of stories today, and often we're going to have a story with someone and someone else is right nearby. Havayativ Rabbi Chiya Kameh. When Rabbi got this letter from Rav, Rabbi Chiya was with him. Amarle, Rabbi Chiya said to Rabbi, wait, but what's this question? When it says she abdu, it could be machru or mishkenu. Is it that they sold or that it was given as collateral? Amarle, my nafkamina. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says it doesn't make a difference. Why not? Bein machru, bein shemishkenu, whether they sold it or whether they gave it as collateral, Halacha lemasa, as we say, the basic halacha is there's no difference. And here comes Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's psak. Motzi'in leparnasa ve'en motzi'in lemizonot. We can't take food from this property that they sold. We've already learned this. But they can take for parnasa, which is her nedunya. So for her dowry, she is allowed to demand it from, even if they sold. Now they want to know. Let's go back to the beginning of the story. Rav wrote this question. And if you noticed, he wrote it in an ambiguous manner. Such noted Rabbi Chiya. So now the Gemara wants to know, and it's going to be a little bit convoluted, but it's not actually very complicated. V'Rav, imachru kamebayale, nichtav le'machru. Imashkanu kamebayale, nichtav le'mishkanu. Rav, so the question is, if he wanted to know about if they sold it, he should have asked if they sold it. If he wanted to know if they had given it as collateral, he should have asked. They given it as collateral. Why did he use this ambiguous term of shiabdu? So to which the Gemara answers, Rav travayu kamabayale. He actually was asking about both. Visaval, and he said the following. He said, if I really want to know both, I should leave it ambiguous because then it'll answer me about both. But if I ask about one specifically and I get an answer for that one, I won't necessarily, and the necessarily is what's important here, I won't necessarily know what the halacha is going to be about the other. So now we're going to go through each possibility. We have two possibilities. Either he asks about mishkanu or he asks about machlu. And what the answers of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would be, which one would be clear what he held in the other case, and which answer would make it unclear what he held in the other case. So it's going to be 4 permutations. Visa. If I wrote my question as if the brothers sold property, can she demand it back? Hanicha, it would have worked. I would have got my answer also for collateral. If he says, yes, they can collect it, since as we said in the beginning, it's more likely she'd collect it from the collateral. So if we say that she'd collect it even from property that he sold, that the brothers sold, then kol sheken mishkano, obviously then, if they only gave it as collateral, because again, collateral is still somewhat in their possession. It's just saying, if I don't pay you back, take it from this land. But if he wrote me back, you can't collect it from the sold property. Still, I wouldn't have had my answer about collateral, because you might say you can't take it from land sold, but maybe she can take it from land that they gave as collateral. So now we're in the possibility of machlu. If he had asked machlu, he wouldn't necessarily have an answer for mishkano. If Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said no, it still might be yes for the collateral. And now we're going to do the same logic with the reverse. Iktiv nale mishkanu. If he had said, what if they gave it as collateral? So again, hanicha ishalach le de'emotziin. If he said, no, they can't take it from the collateral, she can't take it from the collateral, then kol sheken machlu, then we would know the answer. It would be obvious. Of course not if they sold it. But ishalach le motziin, akate machlu kame baile. But if he wrote me back that she can collect it from the collateral, I wouldn't know whether she could collect it from land they actually sold, because that's much less likely. In which case, he thought to himself, Ech tov le shi abdu, the mashma'achi, I'll write this ambiguous term, which seems to include any kind of property that was given to somebody else right now, either as collateral or as a sale. And then I'll get an answer about both. Obviously, you could have asked, why didn't he just specify and say machlu and shiabdu and mishkano? But I think he just meant it was clear that once he said that, it would be clear he meant both. That was all a very long-winded way just to get to the simple, right? If you want the conclusion from this section is that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says she's allowed to collect her nedunya, not her mizonot, but yes, her nedunya. We talked about this yesterday. Why not mizonot? Because mizonot have no set amount, whereas the nedunya is a bit more of a set amount. And therefore, whoever buys the land from them will know when they buy the land that there's a lien on the property for the nedunya of the daughter. If it's a lien on the mizonot, the mizonot could go on for who knows how long, right? It's until she gets married. We don't know when she's getting married. It's a very unclear term. It's not fair to a buyer to have such lack of clarity. So we're not going to have the land lien for that purpose, but yes, for the nedunya. Comes Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan amal, he seems to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He clearly disagrees with him. I say it seems to, we don't know if he's going against Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or this is his opinion. It's not like he's in an argument with him. Remember, they don't live at the same time. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, at the end of the Tkufarat Tanaim, Rabbi Yochanan is second generation Emora. So now the Gemara is going to ask specifically what I said. So he says the exact opposite. If they sold it, if they gave it as collateral, she cannot collect it for her nedunya. So the Gemara wants to know, Rabbi Yochanan, lo shmiya leha de Rebbe? Did he not hear what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said? V'ish shmiya le hava mekabale, and therefore, if he had known that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had said this, maybe he would have changed his mind. O dilma shmiya le v'lo mekabale, or maybe he heard what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said and decided to disagree. Okay, generally, we don't disagree with Tanaim, but maybe he decided to disagree. In any case, okay, we want to know. It's very important to know because the assumption is that he never saw Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He might have never saw his opinion about this. He might have changed his mind when he heard Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say this. In order to understand whether or not he heard Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say this, we're going to bring a story. Tashma, a halachic story, okay? It was said the following case. Somebody dies and leaves 2 daughters and a son. Okay, so the son inherits, the daughters get their nedunya. What happened? So the first daughter comes and she collects her 1/10 for her dowry. Okay, great. The second one doesn't get her dowry yet, and what happens? The son dies. What happens when the son dies? The 9/10 that are left of the property get split between each of the girls. Okay, so now, right, 45. They're going to end up with each 45% of the estate that was from the beginning. Okay, one has a 10th more, and the other has a 10th less now, right? Because they're both going to split right? They're each going to get 45% and the 10%. So one's going to have 55%, one's going to have 45%. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan shniya vitra. So Rabbi Yochanan says that's what's going to happen, and the second one loses her nedunya. Right? What's the other option? The other option is to say, well, here's the estate. One took a 10th. Now the son died. They're supposed to split what's left 50-50. Before they split a 50-50, give the second daughter her 10th for her nedunya, and then split the rest 50-50. And then they'll each get 50% in the end, right? Because they'll each get 40 of what's left. There's 80% left. Each one took a 10. And why don't we do that? So Rabbi Yochanan says, no. We don't do that. She inherits immediately. They split it 50-50. She doesn't get anything specific for the nedunya. So Rabbi Hanina goes against Rabbi Yochanan and says, I don't understand. The nedunya is so strong that they even said, and now he's going to quote Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Motzi'in leparnasah ve'motzi'in lemizanot. When it comes to the nedunya, she can even take it from lien property, which would then, he would say, we would then conclude here also, she should first get her 10th, the second daughter, and then they split the rest 50-50. And you want to say she gave up on her rights? No, she doesn't have to. Now let's try to go into the head of Rabbi Yochanan. If he had never heard this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, because remember, he doesn't say this. If he had never heard it, what would he say? Vim ita. If he had never heard Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and this statement that Rabbi Hanina just quoted, Neimale man amara. He should have said then, who on earth said that? I never heard that before. But the fact that he didn't say, who said that? I never heard this before, must show that he actually had heard it before. And so now they say, he must have heard it. And therefore we can conclude that he heard what Rabbi Hanasi said and decided to disagree. And then what you see here is this machloket. Rabbi Hanina is quoting that. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't bother him so much because he doesn't hold by that opinion. To which the Gemara says, no, you could read this story differently. Dilma la'olam lo shmi'alei. Maybe when he first said the halacha at the beginning of the section, where he said she cannot collect for her dowry from nechasim mishuabadim, right, from stuff he had sold, the brothers had sold, or used as collateral. When he said that, he hadn't heard what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had said. Okay, we're now going to do a timeline. So T1, he didn't hear from Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He said his own thing, separate from him, never heard him before. T2, ki shmi'alei mikabel, kabil. Then later he heard what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had said, and he accepted it. That's T2. T3, he'd already changed his mind, comes this story, and he says to him, right? And now we go back to, he had heard what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had said, but in the meantime, he had changed his mind about it. Okay, in other words, the first case, he hadn't changed his mind yet. So we're basically, what we saw quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan isn't actually true. Again, these are just possibilities the Gemara suggests. Now, what's the issue? If he really changed his mind, then why is Rabbi Hanina arguing against him here and Rabbi Yochanan doesn't change his opinion about the two daughters and the son? In other words, there's one case, which is if the brothers sold, could she demand her nedunya? Rabbi Hanina thought to connect these cases. If she can demand her nedunya from property they sold, then obviously she also can demand it in this case from the other sister and first get her 10th and then split it 50-50. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree. Why? In this case, in the first case where the brothers sold the stuff, she gets no nedunya. In this case, if she's already getting 45% of her father's property, she doesn't need more money for nedunya. You might say it's a little unfair, her and the sister, but that's what happens. One got married earlier and she lucked out. But this one, right, this case, she already has 45% of all his property. She doesn't need more money for nedunya. That's in the first case, she has no money for the nedunya. We need to give her something. But and that's why we're going to say, again, Rabbi Yochanan is going to change to Rabbi Yonan's position. She can demand it from the nechasim that are already sold. But in this case, she doesn't need to get, what's the difference if she gets 40%, 45%? She already has money for her nedunya. Amar Rabbi Meir le Rav Ashi. Wait a minute, he says. If you're saying as long as she has money, then we don't need to give her the nedunya as much as we did before. So eshkacha mitzia ba'alma, let's say she finds some nice, expensive lost item on the street in a case where she can take it for herself. Where she has money in the household. Are you also not going to give her 10? Because you're going to say, look, she found money on the street. So she's good. What I meant is she already got, and remember, she's supposed to get her dowry from the father's estate. So in this case, that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Hanina are arguing about, she already gets property from the father's estate and uses that for her dowry. But in that case, where she finds something on the street, that's not the same as using it from her father's property. And that's obviously a totally different case. So that's the first section for today, this machloket about can she take it from property sold or not? Rabbi Hanasi said yes, Rabbi Yochanan said no, but in the end, at least the Gemara suggests that perhaps Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi either heard, Rabbi Yochanan either heard Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and disagreed with him, or he never heard Rabbi Yehuda. He at an early point he hadn't heard him. When he did hear him, he actually changed his mind. So we don't really know whether Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind or not and really holds this way. Amar Amemar. Now we get into another question, which is there's two kinds of ways she can collect the money. Either, there's two ways of looking at this. Again, the father dies, the sons inherit. The daughters get a dowry from the inheritance. Does that mean that the daughters come in like inheritors, or do they come in like a Baal Chov? Okay, so now, are they just owed money by the brothers, the sisters? Okay, what's the relevance? We're going to see. Amar Amemar, Bat Yoresh et Havya. Her 10th that she gets is a 10th through inheritance laws. Okay, it's basically she inherits it. Amar le Rav Ashi la Amemar. Now here come all the relevancies. Rav Ashi says to Amemar, so according to you, if they just owe her money, if they owe money, let's say you borrow money from the father and the father died, and now you go to get the money back from the Yatomim, theoretically, you can take it from land. But if they give you money, right, that means that's nechasim shuabadim, right? Your loan is mishwabad to the property's linked to your loan. But if they pay you in cash, exactly the money he borrowed, you have no rights to the property. So they can pay their way out by just giving you money, and then you leave their property alone. But if she inherits, then she can claim, I want some property, right? Don't pay me off. You can't pay me off with money. I want my dowry in property. So is that what you're saying? To which he says, Amarle'in. Okay, so again, let's read the words. If they wanted to kick her out with money, basically pay what she's owed in money, are they not allowed to do that? Meaning, can she say, they could theoretically, but if she disagrees, then no. Amarle'in, he said, yes, in fact, that's true. Continues Rav Ashi to question Amemar. Let's say they say, we want to give you this field and, leave us alone. Again, it would have to be 1/10 of the value, but fine, 1/10. Is that not good enough? Can she claim, I don't want that land, I want different land? Amarle'in, he said, yes, that's really what I mean. Now, Rav Ashi was asking this question of Amemar. Rav Ashi, we're going to see, totally disagrees. Rav Ashi Amar, bat ba'alat chov havya. No, she's like anyone who's owed money by the orphans. Okay, and therefore, they can pay her money and be done with it. Va'af Amemar hadarbe. Even Amemar ends up changing his mind. How do we know this? We're going to have a story. Like I told you, we'll have stories today. We're going to have a story. And in the story, Amemar is going to be silent. And from his silence, we're going to infer that he changed his mind. I was standing in front of Amemar, says Rav Manyumi, when the following situation happened. There was a woman who came before him. She wanted 1/10 of the property for the estate for her dowry. And I saw, now he saw because again, Amemar was silent, but I saw from what transpired, this is like the topic sentence, this is his punchline really, but we're going to get the story in a minute. I saw from what he said, from what he didn't say, that if they wanted l'saluke bezuzeh, have a masalik. If they wanted to pay their way out with money, they could. Okay, and she wouldn't have any claims to any land. How so? Because this is what happened. While the woman was there, and the brothers were there as well, I heard the brothers go to the sister and say to her, if we had money, we would have just paid you money. But we happen to have no cash, so we can't. So, I guess you have a claim on our land. But we would pay our way out with money. And Amemar didn't say anything to them. He didn't say, oh, you can't do that. So if they really couldn't do that, he would have answered, you can't do that, which must mean that Amemar changed his mind and thought that they actually are allowed to kick her off by paying her way out, that we view her as a Baal Chov and not as an inheritor, as an heir. Well, until now, it seems like if we put her in the category of a Yoreshet, she has a stronger position. If we put her in the category of a Baal Chov, she's weaker. Now we're going to flip it and say, but wait, there's other differences between Baal Chov and if it's inheritance, and maybe are we going to say that we really treat her as a Baal Chov to the end? And here we're going to see, you'll see in a minute. Hashta de Amrat Baal Chov Havya, de Abba or de Achi. Is she, now this is interesting. We don't know yet what the ramifications, we'll see them in a minute. Is she owed money by the father? Basically, the Nedunya is her father's to give her, but he died. So now the sons are acting in place of the father. Or is she owed money by the brothers? Now, if you remember at the end of yesterday's daf, if we go with the girsa that actually appears in our text, it shows that the father doesn't actually have to give her a Nedunya. So that might weaken the position that it's really the father's responsibility, because it's not really the father's responsibility. It's the responsibility of the brothers when they inherit property. They now have to pay the sister as well, but that becomes their responsibility. So now what's the difference if it's the father that passed on? Either way, the sons have to pay it. It's just a matter, are they paying in place of the father as orphans who are dealing, we all know when you inherit money and there's loans of the father, right? Things have to be paid out from the estate of the father. So that's one method, that they're basically paying things that the father owed in place of him. Or are they coming as brothers that they inherited money from the father and now it's their money and they have to pay her? So there's a very big ramification for this. What's the ramification? This is laws of collecting. When you collect money, depending on what you're collecting for, like for example, if someone damages your property, you get to take the money from it from the best of his land, okay? Because he did something bad and therefore he has to pay from the best. If you're owed money, someone loaned you money, and you pay them back, you pay from the Benoni. It's just a law. You pay from the middle. Okay, we're basically going to classify land. It's going to come up all over the Gemara into bad land, good land, and the best land. Now, obviously, you're still getting the same value. So it's going to be, whatever the amount is that you're owed. In this case, 1/10 of the property in land. But is it land that's really top quality land? And then you'll get less, but top quality. Is it average or is it bad land? In which case you're going to get more, but poor quality land. There's a law that anyone who's owed money by a man who dies and his orphans are paying it back, number one, they get from the ziburit, the worst of the land. So now we're going to say, if she's owed the money from the father and they're acting in place of the father, she's going to get the worst. That's called the ziburit. And number two, because we're worried people take advantage of orphans. This, by the way, is all to protect orphans. We talked about this before, that, in this case, it's complicated because there's daughters and there's the orphans. We always want to protect the orphans. On the other hand, she's also an orphan and we need to protect her as well. So is she considered a balchov of the father, that he passed down this to the sons, in which case she gets from the ziburi? And the second thing is that now she needs to swear that she didn't get this money yet, that he didn't give her a dowry when he was alive. Because anyone who comes and claims, your father owed me money, they could be lying, right? If the father were alive, he'd say, what are you talking about? I paid you back. But the father's not here. So therefore, they make everyone swear that they never got the money. So that would be if we view it as they took on their father's responsibility. But if we say it's the brothers who owe her money directly, then there's no ziburit, there's no shvua. She gets the benoni, like any baal chov, any creditor, and she doesn't have to swear. So that's the big question here. So now we have what's the story? And then, by the way, if you say that she's collecting like a balat chov, then she actually is in better shape because she's not collecting from the orphans, but she gets to collect it from the main land, right? The Benoni. Tashma, let's see it from here. Ravina agbe labarte de Ravashi. By the way, you see her all the time. There's actual cases. This is going on. All these situations are not up in the air, which makes sense because people are dying all the time, leaving their inheritance. The daughters aren't married yet. So what happened? Ravina collected for the daughter of Ravashi, Mimar Bered Ravashi, from the son of Ravashi. Here we go. Benoni v'shelo b'shvua. He collected from the son, good, the average land, and without swearing. You see, it's that the brothers have their obligation on their own. It's not that they're inheriting their obligation from the father. But mi Bered Rabsama, Bered Ravashi, ziburi b'shvua. Ravashi had two sons, Miremar and right, am I saying the name right? Right, it's Miremar, right? Marbered Ravashi. Mar, the son of Ravashi, and Rav Sama, the son of Ravashi. What happened? Rav Sama died before he paid the Nedunya. So basically what happened? When Ravashi died, his two sons are obligated to pay the Nedunya. They're obligated as Baalei Chov. She could have collected it from the average land and without her swearing. But what happened? Before she collected it, Rav Sama died. He passed on by inheritance his chov, his responsibility to the woman, through his son, to his son. So now the collection from his son, which is the grandson of Ravashi, is like someone who inherited his father's chov. So that was from the ziburit. So we ended up with this crazy case where she's collecting from one, half of it is collected from the decent land, without swearing, and the second one is collected from, the other half is collected from the grandson because he inherited his father's responsibility toward her. So that has to be with the shvua, swearing, and only the weak land. Another story. Shalach le Rav Nechemia bered Rav Yosef le Rabba bar Rav Huna zutim in the harda. Okay, so he sends to him, Ki atya ha'ita talakamech. When the following one comes before you into your court, agbe isor nechasim afilim itzrubla. Give her 1/10 of the nedunya, even from the itzrubla. What is that? This is from the base of the millstone, which is attached to the ground. Basically, we saw this before, and we're going to see it more. The nedunya is collected from land, but the base of the millstone is attached to the ground, and therefore it's considered like land. When I was with Rav Kahana, Rav Ashi says, I would see him give to women even from the rent that the kids received from an apartment or a house, right, they would give the rent to her because rent is connected to land and therefore it's considered like land, even though it's cash. Rav Anan le Rav Huna. Now we get the most interesting story of today. Rav Anan sends to Rav Huna the following thing. Okay, here starts his letter. Huna chavrin shlam. You have to understand, Rav Anan was lower in stature than Rav Huna. Rav Huna was the head of the yeshiva. Rav Anan was not. He was lower in stature. And he says the words, Huna chavrin shlam. He starts his letter with, Huna, my friend, peace be with you. And then he continued in his letter, when the following one comes before you, give her a tenth of the property for her dowry. Rav Sheshet was sitting there when Rav Huna got the letter. This is like the beginning of our daf, right, with Rabbi Chiya and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So starts off Rav Huna, he's very angry from the Huna Chavrin. What is he writing to me in this kind of language? And he says, go tell him. And before he says what I want you to tell him, he says the following. And if any of you have the audacity not to say exactly the words that I said to Anan, I will excommunicate you. And this is what I want you to say to him. Anan, okay, treating him disrespectfully. Instead of saying Rav Anan Shalom, he just says Anan, okay, very disparagingly. Mi makarke o mi metaltale. Do you want me to collect it for her from the land or from the movable property? Uman yativ beit marzecha beresha. And who sits in the house of the marzecha, which we don't yet know what it is, at the head? Who sits at the head in the house of the marzecha? Okay, very strange, not clear what he's talking about. As a Rav Sheshet l'kamei Rav Anan, he goes before Rav Anan to deliver this message. You can imagine he's not feeling so good about saying this in front of Rav Anan. Not to mention, in a minute, we're going to learn that Rav Anan was his rabbi. So he says to him, Amarle, Mar Rabbi. He says, listen, you're my rabbi. Ve Rav Huna Rabbi de Rabba. And Rav Huna is the rabbi of my rabbi. Vishamute shamit mandalo Amarle. And by the way, before I say what I'm going to say, I just want you to know that he threatened me. He's going to excommunicate me if I don't say the following. He's trying to kind of protect himself from Rav Anan getting upset with him. And not only that, he adds even more, and if he didn't threaten me with excommunication, I never would have said these words, but here goes. Anan, right? He quotes exactly what he said. Rav Anan did not really understand the message. He didn't really get it. He didn't understand what he had done wrong, right? This happens sometimes. You do something and you don't even realize what you did that was so bad. And we're going to see in a minute, he didn't understand the second line either. We didn't understand it. He didn't understand. He goes to Mar Ukva. Maybe Mar Ukva can help him. He said, did you see what Rav Huna sent me? Anan. He spoke to me so disparagingly. And this marzecha sentence, I didn't know what he's talking about. Easy, turning now to Amabet, he says, tell me really, Gufa, there's a whole different explanation. What easy means, I'm going to just leave it as, tell me really, Gufa de uvda hechiha. What exactly happened? Tell me the whole story. I want to understand better. Amarle hachi v'hachi avamasis. We told him all the details. Amarle gavra. He gets it. He realizes what happened. Amarle gavra de lo yada mai nihu marzecha shalach le Rav Huna Huna chavrin. He says very good. He says a guy who doesn't know even what marzecha is calling Huna chavrin. It's calling Rav Huna chavrin. In other words, you're clearly not at his level. You haven't achieved his greatness. And he was trying to tell you that. Now, there's two connotations with this Bei Marzecha. Number one, he's saying, who sits at the Bei Marzecha Beresha, which is number one, saying, you don't even know what a Marzecha is, right? It's to kind of throw something at him that he probably has no idea what it is, to make him feel stupid and realize that he doesn't know what Rav Huna knows. And number two, what's the meaning of it? What does that have to do with this question? It had nothing to do with this question. To say whether you want me to give Makarke or Metaltale, I understand why he sent that back. That was part of the context of what he was asking. Spir Marzecha, which we don't even yet know what it is, clearly has nothing to do with the context. What's he saying? Who sits at the head of the table? Right? He's saying, I sit at the head of the table, right? In other words, you have to know there's a hierarchy here, and you can't just break down the hierarchy. There's rules about who sits at the head of the table. So now, my Marzecha, that's the end of the story. Gemara wants to know what's Marzecha? Avel. It's a person who's in Avelut, okay, a mourner. So the question is, who sits at the mourner's table at the head? Now, you might remember this. We had this entire sugya in Moed Katam when we were learning about laws of mourners. Dichtiv Kama Hashem, Al tavo beit marzeach, and then it says, Va'al telech lispod, and don't go to eulogize. So don't go to the house of the mourners and don't eulogize. There you see marzeach means mourner. Amar Rabbi Avau, so now we want to know who sits at the head and how do we know it? Binayin la'avel shemesed b'rosh. It's the mourner that sits at the head of the table. Shneimar, how do we know this? The first pasuk we quoted was from Yirmiyahu. This is from Eov. Right? If you're going to talk about a velut, it's Eov. He's the one. When he's mourning what's happened to him, he says, I wish I was sitting back at the head. And I would sit like a king with his fleet of soldiers. And like when the avelim, okay, now it's very tricky. Yinachem sounds like they console. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky, but what they're going to say, it means here is the same way the melech sits, the king sits at the head, also the one who's mourning sits at the head. To which the Gemara says, Yinachem acharim mashma. Sounds like when people come to console the mourners, it would sound like they're the ones who sit at the head. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Yinachem ktiv. It's not Yinachem, which means they will console. Yinachem will be consoled. When the mourners will be consoled, they sit at the head. So that's the first proof. Marzutra omer mehacha v'sar merzach sruchim. This is also a very unclear pasuk from Amos. Mar v'zach, someone who's bitter and in turmoil. Naaseh sar l'sruchim, will be the head of not great people. But what it means is they're going to sit at the head. Amarava hilchata. Okay, so that's basically sar. It's a play on the samach and the sin. Sal is to turn away, but here they understand it as sal, as officer, right, who will become the head. Okay, so from there you see that the avel sits at the head. Back to our topic, Amarava, last line before we get to the new Mishnah, Hilchatami makarke evalomi metaltale, bein lemazone, bein lektuva, bein leparnasa. Even though we saw a bunch of distinctions, which one gets collected from where, we now say that Rabbi Paskins, from land, not from movable property, can the woman demand, number one, mizonot, 2, ketuba money, 3, parnasa, her nedunya. All those 3 get collected from land, not from metaltalin. If you remember, we talked about that in the time of the Gaonim, they changed this, okay, that she could collect from metaltalin because many people didn't have land. If there were no landowners, it would be very hard for the woman to ever get her ketuba money. So they changed it. But at this time, Rava says this is the halacha across the board, even though we saw these opinions that tried to distinguish. So what we dealt with so far today was all these laws about how she can collect on a dunya, what her rights are. Is she collecting it like an inheritor, like a baal chov, like a creditor? How do we view this whole thing? What property can she collect it from? Can she collect it from lien property? Right? This halacha doesn't relate to the lien. It relates to specifically the land. But we already saw the Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and even Rabbi Yochanan possibly even changed his mind about it, that she can collect from lien property as well. New Mishnah. The main topic of this Mishnah is how seriously do we have to take the words of a dead person? Okay, the words of a person before he dies on his deathbed. Okay, I should be more clear. The words, right, I'm trying to translate in my head. Mitzvah l'kayem divrei hamet is the way they say it in Hebrew, which doesn't mean, right, I was translating it literally, divrei hamet is the dead person's words. What it means is once they die, whatever they said before, we have to take very seriously. And thus holds Rabbi Meir in this Mishnah. Hamashlish ma'ot libito. A man on his deathbed says, I want to give this money to my daughter, and I'm going to give it through my messenger. I want my best friend, let's say, to be in charge of buying a field for my daughter. So he gives it to somebody else on his deathbed. Now she has a husband in the picture. Okay, we'll see later, is she betrothed or is she married? She says, Ne'eman ba'ali alai. I trust my husband more than your friend. I'd rather my husband get the money and he buy the property. Yaseh hashalish mashu slash biyado. The messenger has to do it. Right? Shalish comes to the word shalosh, third, like a third party. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi, because he takes very seriously mitzvah l'kayem divrei hamet. That's what he wanted. That's what we have to do. Rabbi Yossi, no way, no how. This whole thing is to buy a field. Now, if there was a field right here, right now, and she wanted to sell it, she could sell it herself. So if she has rights to the land, then she obviously has rights to the money to give the money to whoever she wants and let her husband buy it. So I disagree with you entirely. Now comes this line, which in the Gemara is going to be unclear. Was it relating to Rabbi Meir or is it relating to Rabbi Yossi? In which case are we referring to? Bigdola ava b'ktana ema sektana klum. It must be only in a grown woman, but if she's a minor, her actions are meaningless, meaning whatever she wants is totally irrelevant. Because she's a minor, we don't take minors seriously in general in halacha. So now the Gemara is going to quote a braita, which is really a tosefta. It's in the tosefta. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. And in this tosefta, we're going to have more detail. Is it erusin? Is it nisuin? More detail about the debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. And then we're going to try to figure out exactly where their key disagreement is. And then with that, we're going to get to this last line of the Mishna and who's it referring to? He gives money to a third party for the son-in-law. Now, this sounds different from the Mishna, but it's not different at all. It's the exact same case because ultimately, whatever land she gets, her nichsei malog, or going to her Yusuf property, are going to go to her husband anyway, right? He's going to get proceeds. So it means for her husband's use while he's married to her. Likach man sadeh lebito, in order to buy a field for his daughter. So same exact case. V'hi omeret yinatnu lebali, and she wants them to go to her husband. Mina nisuin, if she's married, hareshut biyada. This is going to be Rabbi Meir. He's going to agree with Rabbi Yossi in the case where she's actually already married. If she's married, yes, she does have rights to do what she wants with it and give it to her husband to buy. Mina erusin yaseh shalish mashu shlash biyado. So this limits our Mishnah to Rabbi Meir's position being only when she's betrothed to him. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi omer, hagdola, if she's a grown woman, beimina nisuin, beimina erusin areshut biyada. He disagrees and says, even from erusin. So ktana, beimina nisuin, beimina erusin, yaseh shalish mashu shlash biyado. And if she's a ktana, no case can she get rights to anything. So now the question is my benayu, because they were each talking a little bit differently. If you notice, Rabbi Meir didn't mention Gdola or Ktana. He said, Erusin Nisuin. Erusin, no rights. Nisuin, she has full rights. Does that mean even if she's a minor? And then he disagrees with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, no. If she's a minor, no, not for marriage. So that's the question. My benayu, Ilema Ktana mina Nisuin. I only gave the first side. Is it a minor from Nisuin? Is there a disagreement? And do Rabbi Meir Savar HaReshut Biyada? The Rabbi Meir says even a minor, when she's married, she has rights to give it to her husband. And Ata Rabbi Yossi lemeimar afilu min nisuinami gdola in tanalo. And comes Rabbi Yossi and he says, no. If it's from marriage, even if it's from marriage, only if she's a grown woman. If she's not, she has no rights whatsoever. Because again, her rights come from her ability to sell. She can't sell if she's a minor. So ema sefer. They said, let's learn it from this last line of the Mishnah. Aval b'ktana ema sektana klum. Now, who is this? Now, if we say this is Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir says Ktana em aseh klum, then he's not going to think and disagree with Rabbi Yossi about Ktana min nisuin, because he's going to say no matter what a Ktana can't do it. Again, Rabbi Meir in the braita and the Tosefta didn't specify Ktana or Gdola, but maybe in the Mishnah he did. So that's what we're going to prove right now. That in fact he did. This line must be Rabbi Meir. Ha-man katanela. So who is this line said by? Rabbi Yossi hamiresha shmamina. We already know that Rabbi Yossi says it's only Gdola because of what he said in the Resha. Now look back in the Resha of the Mishnah. What did he say? Isn't her field hers to sell, and therefore she can decide what to do with the money also? Now, when is the field hers to sell? Only when she's a Gdola. If she's a Ktana, she can't sell her field. She's a minor. So let's read it inside now. She could sell it. Gdola batzvini in, Ktana de la batzvini he lo. He must be referring only to a Gdola, not a Ktana, which means that the next line to say only a grown woman and not a minor can't possibly be him because he already, it's clear from his words that that's what he meant. Therefore, Ella Rabbi Meir. It's really Rabbi Meir. You should read the Mishnah. Now we're going to combine all this, the Mishnah and the Tosefta together and reread Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah. He has to do what he's told to do, what the father said. When is this said? Mina erusin. Now we're doing based on the Tosefta, only from betrothal. But when she's married, she can do it if she wants, right? She can do what she wants with it. But what? In which case, big dola, but not if she's a minor. So the machloket between them must be, now we get to the second option, which I didn't spell out yet. Because Rabbi Meir says, not mina erusin, right? You have to listen to the father. And Rabbi Yossi says, we listen to. So that must be the difference. And Itmar, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Halacha ke Rabbi Yossi, Rav Amar Rav Nachman, Halacha ke Rabbi Meir. So we end up with a split. Who says what? Who holds like who? Last thing for today, we're going back to a story in Tani Kaf Aleph, a very fascinating story with Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan. You might remember it. Even Lana Kirshen taught the story in the Seal about the two of them. They want to go leave the Beit Midrash and go to work. And Rabbi Yehuda hears these voices and he decides, I better go back to the Beit Midrash. I'm going to turn into a great person. I'm going to be a very important, prominent person. I got to go learn. Ilfa went out to work. Many years later, he comes back and he's worried that people will say, oh, you don't know anything. You don't learn Torah. And he comes and he does the following thing, very daring act. And we get now the other half of this story. Okay. The end half of the story. He hangs himself on the mast of the boat and he says the following, Amal. Is there someone who's going to come along and bring me some Torah of Rabbi Oshaya and Rabbi Chiya, which their stuff was in the braita? Oh, did I say Rabbi Yehuda? Sorry, Rabbi Yochanan. It's Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa. If I said the wrong thing, apologies. It's Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa. So comes Ilfa and he says, I'm going to stand here right now. I dare you to come. Bring me any braita from Rabbi Chiya or Rabbi Oshaya, and I will bring you a proof for it in the Mishna. And if not, I will fall from here and I will drown. Atahu Saba, an elderly gentleman comes over to him, Tanale, and he brings the following source, and he says, Ha'omer tnu shekel lebanai b'Shabbat. If on his deathbed he says, give my sons a shekel, which is half the value of a selah per week, u're'uim li'ten lem selah, but prices went up and they can't afford to eat on that kind of money, we give them a selah. We assume he just meant give them whatever they need. So notnim lem selah. V'im amal, al titnu lem ela shekel. But if he says, don't give them only a shekel, then you have to do what he said, even though it's not enough food for them, they only get a shekel a week. And if he says, if my sons die, then I want my money, whatever's left, to go to Ploni, so-and-so, okay? Whichever language he used, the one that was less clear, what he wanted. In this case, it's clear that he wants there to be money left. So if he said shekel, doesn't matter how he worded it, we're going to assume he meant only shekel because he wanted money to go to someone else in the end. So Amar le Hamane, who is this? To which Ilfa answers, Rabbi Meir, Amar mitzvah came to Bram mate. And he basically quotes our Mishna and he says, it's a mitzvah to do exactly what the guy said. And that's why he says that we do exactly what he said. And that's Rabbi Meir. And thank God he was saved. He didn't have to jump off the mast of the boat. And there ends our story. And we were right when we learned in Tani, we said, oh, this is some sugya we're going to get to. Now we got to the sugya. Have a great day, everybody.